The Young and the Restless spoiler shock. Patty's sudden return to Genoa City wasn't driven by love, obsession, or lingering feelings for Jack. She was demanding what she wanted. For Patty, this wasn't a reunion. It was revenge, a plan she'd been preparing for years. For years, Patty had tormented herself over this loss. She claimed her beloved son had died at birth. But this was just a flawed plan. Would Patty realize it? Victor had told her a secret that, if true, would rewrite the past and shatter the Abbott family forever. According to Victor, Kyle was never Diane's son. Kyle was Patty's son. And the most cruel part of the story was the accusation that Jack had orchestrated this deception. Victor claims that years ago, Jack swapped the two children, taking Patty's child and raising him as his own alongside Diane. The child Patty was raising was actually Diane's, but that child was very ill and died shortly after. For a long time, she had felt a void in her life, an emptiness she could never explain. Now, Victor had given that void a name and a face: Kyle Abbott. In Patty's mind, the truth suddenly became clear. Jack had stolen her child and built a happy life on the ruins of her pain. Whether Victor told her the whole truth or simply distorted the past to serve his own purposes no longer mattered to Patty. What mattered was the burning certainty that reigned in her heart. She had lost years of motherhood, years that could never be recovered. Every birthday Kyle had ever celebrated, every milestone he'd ever reached, every happy moment he'd shared with Diane, Patty believed those moments had been stolen from her. The grief and the anger that followed were unbearable. And Patty decided that the only way to reclaim her life was to reclaim the son she rightfully believed belonged to her. And that's why she'd approached Jack earlier, luring him into a situation that would allow Victor's hidden camera to capture that infamous photograph. Patty understood the photo would cause chaos, especially when Diane saw it. It was never intended to be a romantic moment. It was intended to spark a war within the Abbott family. If Diane lost her temper, if Kyle began to doubt everything he believed about his parents, the foundation of their family would begin to crumble. And Patty intended to make those cracks widen until the entire structure collapsed. The moment Patty finally confronted them came with explosive force. Diane and Kyle were still reeling from the photograph when the door suddenly burst open. Patty entered the room with a terrifying calmness that sent shivers down her spines. Her gaze instantly locked into Kyle, an intense stare that made him instinctively recoil. For a moment, no one spoke. The air grew heavy, as if the entire room were holding its breath. Then Patty's voice broke the silence, trembling with emotion but loud enough to shake the room. "My son." The words struck like lightning. Diane's face turned pale with disbelief while Kyle struggled to process what he had just heard. Patty moved closer, her eyes fixed on Kyle as if she had finally found what she had been searching for her entire life. In her hand was a document clutched tightly, as if it contained evidence that would change everything. Without hesitation, she handed the paper to Kyle. It was the DNA test result. Kyle stared at the document in stunned silence. The numbers and scientific language were jumbled together, but the conclusion at the bottom was unmistakable. According to the report, the genetic match between him and Patty was undeniable. Patty's voice rang out, a mixture of triumph and anguish as she watched him read the results. "See?" she cried, her voice echoing the pain she buried for years. "You're my son, not hers." Diane's composure shattered instantly. Anger and disbelief surged through her as she stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. She accused Patty of lying, fabricating evidence, and concocting a twisted charade to destroy their family. But Patty only laughed bitterly, a laugh that held the resentment of a lifetime.
The salt air was not cleansing. It was heavy, suffocating, clinging to the mahogany panels of the Times S. Ruthless Times like a second skin. Outside the Atlantic churned a gray, restless beast that mirrored the storm brewing within the mind of the woman standing at the stern. Patty Williams gripped the railing, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the dark water met the darker sky. She was no longer the fragile cat-carrying woman who had been carted off to Fairview time and time again. 10 years of silence, of medication, of staring at white walls, had forged something harder in her, something brittle, yes, but sharp. She reached into the pocket of her trench coat, her fingers brushing against the cold folded edges of the manila envelope Victor Newman had pressed into her hands just hours ago. His voice still echoed in her ears, a low gravelly rumble that sounded less like a man and more like fate itself. Asterisk. You think you know what they took from you, Patty. You think you know the extent of Jack's betrayal times. Victor had said, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses, even in the dim light of the safe house. Asterisk. You know nothing. Asterisk. He had handed her the file, then a weapon wrapped in paper. Asterisk. Diane Jenkins didn't just steal your husband. She stole your legacy. She stole your flesh and blood. Asterisk. Patty shivered not from the cold, but from the electric jolt of the memory. She turned away from the sea and looked toward the cabin door. Behind it, Jack Abbott, the love of her life, the architect of her ruin, was waiting. He was Victor's prisoner, a pawn in some corporate game over Chancellor Industries that Patty couldn't care less about. But to her, he was the keeper of a secret that had just shattered her world. She pushed the door open. The cabin was lavish, appointed with the kind of understated luxury that screamed Abbott or Newman, depending on who signed the check. Jack Abbott sat on the edge of the velvet settee, his head in his hands. He looked ragged. The usually impeccable CEO of Jabot was stripped of his armor, his suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his silver hair disheveled. He looked up as the latch clicked. When he saw her, a mixture of exhaustion and wariness crossed his face. He didn't know the new Patty. He only knew the old one, the one who made cakes, the one who broke. "Patty," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "Has Victor sent word? Is he done with this charade? My family. Diane must be out of her mind with worry." The name times Diane times acted like a spark in a room full of gasoline. Patty's lips twitched a smile that didn't reach her eyes, stretching across her face. She closed the door behind her, the lock engaging with a heavy times thud times that seemed to seal the room from the rest of the world. "Diane," Patty repeated, testing the word, like a piece of rotten fruit. "Yes, I imagine she is worried. Worried that her house of cards is finally about to blow over." She walked to the small bar in the corner, her movements fluid, predatory. She poured a glass of water not for herself, but to have something to do with her trembling hands. "Victor isn't the one you need to worry about right now, Jack," she said softly, her back to him. "Patty, please," Jack pleaded, standing up. He took a step toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I know Victor is using you. He's manipulating your history, your pain. Don't let him. We can end this. Just let me make a call." Patty spun around the glass, slamming onto the counter with enough force to slosh water over the rim. "Manipulating? Is that what you call the truth, Jack? Is the truth a manipulation just because it's inconvenient for you?" Jack stopped, frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about 1990, Jack. I'm talking about the lies. The layers and layers of lies you wrapped me in to keep me quiet, to keep me times crazy, asterisk." She reached into her coat and pulled out the envelope. She held it up, the paper crinkling in the silence. "Victor didn't just give me a job. He gave me clarity. He gave me times this asterisk." Jack stared at the envelope. "What is that?" "It's a birth certificate," Patty said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And a DNA test. A very old, very buried DNA test from Memorial Hospital." "Patty, you're not making sense." "Am I not?" She laughed, a high brittle sound. "Let me tell you a story, Jack. A story about a woman who was told her baby died. A woman who was medicated until she couldn't remember her own name, let alone the cry of her newborn. And a man. A man who wanted his son so badly, but didn't want the unstable mother that came with him." Jack's face went pale. "Patty, we lost that baby. You know that. It was a tragedy, but—" "D.I.D." Patty screamed, the sound tearing through the small room. She lunged forward, closing the distance between them, thrusting the envelope against his chest. Read it, and tell me we lost him." Jack took the envelope, his hand shaking. He opened the flap and pulled out the documents. His eyes scanned the pages, confusion, morphing into shock, and then into a horror, so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in seconds. The document was a paternity and maternity test, dated over 30 years ago. The subjects times baby boy Abbott asterisk. The parents times Jack Abbott times, and times Patricia Williams asterisk. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was the second document, a transfer log, signed by a doctor long since dead, authorizing the swap of the infant with the stillborn child of Diane Jenkins. "No," Jack whispered, the paper trembling in his grip. This is a forgery. Victor had this made. It's a lie." "Is it Patty?" His leaning into his face. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated, burning with a manic intensity. "Look at him, Jack. Look at Kyle. Does he really have Diane's venom? Does he have her coldness? Or does he have the Williams fire? Does he have times my times eyes?" Jack stumbled back, collapsing onto the settee. "Kyle is Diane's son. I was there. I saw." "You saw what you wanted to see." Patty paced the room, her hands gesturing wildly. "Diane was your prize. I was your burden. When I got pregnant, you were terrified. You knew I was fragile. You didn't trust me to raise an Abbott heir. But Diane, oh Diane, was fierce. Diane was a survivor. So you and your precious father, you made a choice. My father would never—" "Don't you dare sanctify John Abbott to me," Patty cut him off. "Victor told me everything. How the switch was made. Diane's baby was born silent. Mine was screaming for his mother. And you took him. You gave him to her. You let me believe my baby was gone so you could ship me off to the funny farm and play happy family with that viper." "That is insane," Jack gasped, struggling for breath. "I never knew. I would never." "Ignorance is not innocence," Jack Patty roared. "Maybe you didn't sign the papers. Maybe you just turned a blind eye. Maybe you let Victor or your father handle the messy details, but you raised him. You raised times my times son, calling times her times mother. She stopped pacing and stood over him, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her makeup. Do you know what it's like? To watch from the shadows, to see Kyle grow up in the magazines, to see him smile that Abbott smile and feel a pull in your gut that you can't explain. I thought I was crazy. Everyone told me I was crazy. But I wasn't. I was a mother mourning a child who was right in front of her. Jack looked at the DNA test again. The seal of the lab was authentic. The dates lined up perfectly with the timelines. He had long suppressed the chaotic overlap of his relationships, the hazy memories of that hospital stay. A cold dread settled in his stomach. Victor Newman was capable of anything, yes. He was capable of forgery. But this felt different. It felt like a landmine that had been buried beneath the Abbott mansion for 3 decades, waiting for the right footstep. And if at times was times true, the room spun. Kyle, his son, the boy he had fought for, the man he had groomed to take over Jabot. Kyle, who was currently at home terrified for his father's safety, leaning on Diane for support. Diane. If this was true, Diane had been living a lie of biblical proportions. Or worse, she knew. Did she know? Did she accept a stolen baby to secure her place in the Abbott dynasty? You're quiet, Jack Patty whispered. She was kneeling in front of him now, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly tender register. She reached out and touched his knee. It's a lot to take in. I know. It took me a while. When Victor showed me, I screamed until my throat bled. But then I felt peace. Because I knew I wasn't broken. I was just robbed. Patty, Jack said, his voice cracking. Even if this were true, why now? What do you want? Patty's expression hardened. The tenderness evaporated, replaced by the steel of a woman with nothing left to lose. I want what is mine, she said. Kyle is a grown man, Jack said, trying to regain some semblance of authority. He has a life, a wife, a child of his own. You can't just... I want my son, Patty shrieked, scrambling to her feet. She grabbed a crystal decanter from the table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the bulkhead, showering the cabin in shards of glass and amber liquor. I missed his first steps, she cried, pacing through the broken glass, heedless of the crunch beneath her boots. I missed his first words. I missed the scraped knees and the prom dates and the wedding. I missed times everything times because of you and that. That times, bitch, asterisk. She turned on him, her chest heaving. You think this ends with a conversation? You think we just go back to Genoa City and I go back to the facility and you go back to your mansion? No, Jack. The script has flipped. She pointed a trembling finger at him. You are going to fix this. You are going to tell him. You are going to look Kyle in the eye and tell him that his mother isn't the woman who used him as a pawn to get into your bank account. You're going to tell him his mother is the woman who loved him enough to die for him, the woman who was erased for him. Patty, think about what this will do to him, Jack implored. He loves Diane. They have rebuilt their relationship. This will destroy him. Good, Patty yelled. Let it be destroyed. Let the lie burn down so the truth can breathe. Do you think I care about his comfort? I care about his times, soul times, Jack. He is living a lie. Every time he says mom to her, it's a betrayal of nature. She leaned in, close her face inches from his. Victor gave me the proof. But you are going to give me the restitution. And if I refuse, Jack asked quietly. Patty smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Jack had ever seen. It was the smile of a child holding a match to a curtain. Then you never leave this boat, she said simply. And I go to Kyle myself. I show him the papers, I show him the medical logs, and I tell him that his father chose to protect a lie rather than save him. Who do you think he'll forgive Jack? The mother who was stolen from him, or the father who did the stealing? Jack felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the porthole. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red glow over the water. He was trapped, physically, by the ocean and Victor's security. But emotionally, he was trapped in a cage of his own making, forged by 30 years of secrets he hadn't even known he was keeping. He thought of Kyle. He thought of the tension that always existed between Kyle and Diane, the struggle for trust, the wariness. Was it instinct? Was it a primal sense that she wasn't really his blood? And Diane. God, Diane. If this got out? Victor Jack muttered, a sudden realization dawning on him. Victor isn't doing this for Chancellor. He doesn't care about the company. Of course not, Patty scoffed. Victor plays the long game. Chancellor is just the bait to get Billy to dance. This asterisk this times is the kill shot. This is for you, Jack. To dismantle your legacy. To turn your son against you. To turn your wife into a pariah. To leave you with nothing. She walked back to the door, her hand resting on the latch. We dock in 2 days, she said, her voice devoid of emotion now. You have until then to decide how you want to play this. But make no mistake, Jack. When we step off this boat, I am claiming my son. And if you stand in my way, I will burn the Abbott family to the ground." She opened the door. The wind howled outside, a mournful, angry sound. "Patty, wait," Jack called out. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. For a fleeting second, the madness receded, and he saw the young woman he had once married, the girl who just wanted to be loved. "He has my eyes, Jack," she whispered. "Doesn't he?" Then she stepped out, and the heavy steel door slammed shut, sealing Jack Abbott in with the ghosts of his past and the ruins of his future. Jack sat in the silence, the envelope resting on his lap like a lead weight. He picked up the DNA test again. Asterisk 99.9% probability. Asterisk. He closed his eyes, and a single tear leaked out. He tried to picture Kyle's face. He tried to overlay Patty's features onto his son's. The jawline, the temper, the fierce protective loyalty. It was all there. The boat rocked violently as a wave hit the hull. The storm was here. And in Genoa City, the sun was shining. Diane was probably drinking tea in the parlor, and Kyle was at Jabot completely unaware that his identity was about to be erased. Jack crushed the paper in his hand. Victor had won. He hadn't just kidnapped Jack. He had kidnapped the past. And as the Times, Ruthless Times cut through the dark water, Jack knew that no matter what happened next, the Abbott family was already dead. The only question was, who would survive the funeral?